My brother's message arrived just after 4 on a Wednesday afternoon, the kind of message that looks harmless until you read it twice. I was sitting at my desk in the back office of the Hospice Center on Abercorn Street in Savannah, finishing the last chart review of the day. Outside my window, the late sun was catching the tops of the live oaks, the branches hanging heavy with Spanish moss. It was quiet in the building. Most of the nurses had already left for evening rounds, and the phones had finally stopped ringing. Ethan's name lit up my screen. At first glance, the message looked like one more logistical adjustment in a family that had always loved small adjustments. Dinner Friday with Claire's family is confirmed. You can come if you want. I almost smiled. For a moment, it sounded like the normal thing an older brother might say when his life was starting to move forward. New engagement, new family introductions, a room full of people who mattered to him. Then I read the second part. But it would be better if you didn't mention you're my sister. Her dad is a U.S. Senator, and things could get awkward. I stared at the words long enough for the phone screen to dim. Some insults arrive loudly. They crash through a room and leave no doubt about what they mean. Others arrive the way Ethan's did, quiet, polite, written, as if they were small favors you should feel grateful to grant. You can come, just not as family. Before I could decide whether to respond, the phone rang. My mother's name appeared this time. Diane Vale had always believed that the right tone could make almost anything sound reasonable. "Sweetheart," she said. The moment I answered, her voice, warm and careful. "Ethan told me he texted you." I waited. "It's just that this dinner is very important," she continued. "Claire's father has a lot of people around him, donors, colleagues, community leaders. It would probably be easier if you kept things simple for one evening." Simple. In my family, that word usually meant invisible. "He thought it might be best if you sat at one of the smaller tables," she added gently. "There's a nice corner near the service entrance. It'll be quieter there." Quieter meant out of sight. I leaned back in my chair and looked across the small office. On the far wall hung the framed photos we kept of patients who had passed through our hospice program. Families who had sent cards months later just to say thank you for helping them through the hardest nights of their lives. "Just for Friday," my mother said softly. "We don't want anything to become uncomfortable." Uncomfortable for whom, she didn't say. Ethan had spent his whole life learning how to look impressive in the right rooms. My parents had helped him build that life, step by careful step. Private school tuition networking dinners. Introductions to people who could open doors. I had taken a different road, one that didn't photograph as well. "I'll come," I said finally. My mother sounded relieved. "Good. That's wonderful." After we hung up, the room felt unusually still. I turned back to my desk and opened the bottom drawer, looking for the folder where I kept extra patient forms. Instead, my hand brushed against a thick envelope I hadn't thought about in months. The paper was cream-colored, the return address printed neatly across the top. United States Senate. Inside was a short, handwritten note, thanking me for the care I had given a woman during her final night at home. Her husband had signed it himself. Robert Whitmore, Claire Whitmore's father. I held the letter in my hands for a long moment and felt something inside me shift. My brother thought the most embarrassing thing in that room would be admitting I was his sister. What he didn't understand yet was that the man he was trying so hard to impress might already know exactly who I was. Thursday mornings at the hospice center usually started quietly. The building on Abercorn Street always carried the same gentle rhythm, coffee brewing in the staff kitchen, nurses trading updates in low voices, in the soft shuffle of families coming in with questions they weren't sure how to ask. I arrived a little earlier than usual that morning, long before the first patient calls began. The envelope from the Senate was still in my purse. I had slipped it back there the night before, after reading it again, as if touching it twice might confirm something I hadn't fully understood the first time. But by morning, the letter felt less important than the thought it had stirred up. Because the truth was nothing Ethan had said the day before was new. It was simply clearer than usual. In my family, Ethan had always been the child who was easy to introduce. When we were growing up in Savannah, people remembered him immediately. He had the kind of confidence that made teachers smile before he had even said anything interesting. He was good at shaking hands, good at remembering names, good at telling adults exactly the kind of story they wanted to hear about the future. My parents noticed that early. Private schools followed. Debate camps in the summers. The kind of structured activities that build the sort of resume that looks impressive to people you haven't met yet. And every time Ethan reached another milestone, my parents talked about it, like the family name had taken one more step upward. I was proud of him. At least that's what I told myself for many years. My road had started differently. When our grandmother's health began to fail, it wasn't Ethan who learned how to change dressings or sit through long afternoons at the dialysis clinic. It wasn't him who memorized the quiet language of hospital corridors. That was me. At first, it had only been practical. I lived closer. My schedule was easier to bend. But over time, the responsibility settled into something deeper. I learned what it meant to hold someone's hand through the slow, confusing edge of illness. I learned that dignity often looks very small from the outside, like adjusting a pillow or waiting patiently through the third repetition of the same story. And somewhere during those long months, I realized that was the work I wanted to do. Hospice didn't look impressive on a holiday card. It didn't make people lean forward at dinner parties. But it mattered. My parents never said they were ashamed of my job. Not once. What they did instead was something quieter. They learned how to explain it away. She works in healthcare support, my mother would say, at neighborhood gatherings. Something with community services, my father might add if someone asked for more detail. Neither description was exactly wrong. They just weren't exactly right either. By the time Ethan started building the kind of career that put him in rooms with donors and board members, the pattern had already settled into place. He was introduced. I was interpreted. Late that morning, while I was reviewing patient files, my coworker, Tessa Moreno, leaned into the doorway of my office. Tessa had been a hospice nurse for nearly 20 years, long enough to recognize when someone was carrying a quiet weight. "You look like you didn't sleep," she said gently. "I slept," I answered. "Just not very well." She stepped inside and set a folder on my desk. "New intake this afternoon," she said. "Family's nervous. First time dealing with hospice." That kind of situation always pulled me back into focus. Because families like that didn't care about resumes or introductions. They cared about whether someone in the room knew what to do when the world suddenly became fragile. Tessa paused before leaving. "You going somewhere nice tomorrow night?" she asked casually. I must have looked surprised. "You left your calendar open?" she said, pointing toward my desk. "Friday, 7 p.m., dinner." "Family thing," I said. Tessa nodded slowly, the way people do when they understand more than you've actually told them. "Well," she said, "whoever you're meeting, they're lucky you showed up." After she left the office, went quiet again. I opened my purse and looked at the Senate envelope one more time. In my family, Ethan had always been the one people admired first. But sometimes admiration had less to do with truth than with who was doing the introductions. And for the first time in a long while, I wondered what would happen if the introduction stopped. By Friday morning, I had read the note 3 times. Not because it was long. It wasn't. Senator Robert Whitmore had written only a few lines in a firm, measured hand, thanking me for the care I had given his wife during her final night at home. But the simplicity of it was what made it stay with me. People with that kind of power rarely write their own thank you notes unless something mattered to them. I was sitting at the small table in my kitchen with a mug of coffee growing cold beside my elbow, the envelope open again in front of me. Outside, Savannah was gray and damp, the kind of coastal winter morning that made the light look tired before noon. I should have been getting ready for work. Instead, I was looking at a piece of cream-colored paper and thinking about a woman named Helen Whitmore. 2 years earlier, she had come home to die. That was the language hospice people used when we were being honest. Not pass away, not transition, home to die. The Whitmore house sat out near Isle of Hope, large. Without being flashy, old enough to feel settled rather than decorative. I had been the on-call coordinator that night, covering a string of difficult cases, and by the time I got there, the family was moving around the house with that strained, careful energy people have when they are trying not to do anything wrong in front of someone they love. Mrs. Whitmore had been frightened. Not dramatic, not loud, just tired, uncomfortable, and trying very hard to stay dignified while her body stopped cooperating with her. Her breathing had changed. Her daughter was crying in a bathroom with the door mostly closed. The private duty aide had done everything she could, but the room still carried the feeling that everyone was waiting for someone else to know what to do next. That someone had been me. I remembered adjusting Mrs. Whitmore's pillows, changing the lamplight so it stopped falling directly into her eyes, guiding her daughter through the medication schedule, and standing in the hallway with her husband while he asked the kind of practical questions people ask when grief is still too large to name. How long do you think? Will she be in pain? Should I call the priest now or wait? He had not said much more than that. Men like Robert Whitmore probably spent their lives in rooms where certainty mattered. That night, certainty had left him standing in a hallway outside his own bedroom, holding onto a doorframe like it was the only solid thing in the house. I had stayed until just after 1 a.m. Mrs. Whitmore died before sunrise. A week later, the note arrived. At the time, I had tucked it away because hospice teaches you something quickly. If you carry every family home with you forever, the weight becomes impossible. So I put the note in a drawer and went back to work. Now it was back in my hands. And what unsettled me wasn't the idea that Senator Whitmore might remember my face. It was the possibility that Ethan knew there was at least some chance he would. I thought back to his message. Not just, don't mention you're my sister. Not just keep things simple. Awkward. That had been the word he chose. As if the risk wasn't my presence. As if the risk was recognition. I folded the letter carefully and slid it back into the envelope. For the first time, the dinner with Claire's family no longer felt like a private humiliation I had been asked to absorb quietly. It felt like something far more deliberate, and by the time I left for work, I could no longer tell whether Ethan was trying to hide me from that room or hide that room from the truth about me. By late Friday afternoon, the hospice center had settled into its familiar end-of-day rhythm. But my mind refused to follow it. The intake family, Tessa had mentioned the day before, arrived just after 3. A middle-aged couple and their grown son sat across from me in the consultation room, their hands wrapped around paper cups of coffee that had long gone cold. Their questions were the same ones families always asked when they first stepped into the strange territory of hospice care. What happens first? How much time there might be? Whether the pain could really be managed? I answered the way I had answered hundreds of times before, slowly, carefully, making sure every explanation left room for both truth and dignity. By the time they left, the tension in the room had softened just a little. The son even managed a tired half-smile when I walked them to the front desk. Moments like that usually grounded me. But that afternoon, the clock on the wall kept pulling my attention back. 6:15, 6:28, 6:34. Dinner with Claire Whitmore's family was scheduled for 7. The restaurant Ethan had chosen was the Mercer House, one of the old brick places in downtown Savannah, where the lighting is low and the tables are spaced just far enough apart to make every conversation feel private. It was exactly the kind of place people chose when they wanted an evening to look important. I finished my paperwork, shut down my computer, and slipped the Senate envelope back into my purse before leaving the office. Not as evidence, just as a reminder. The drive downtown took 15 minutes. Traffic was light, the streets glowing under the soft orange of the early evening lamps. By the time I parked near Monterey Square, the air had cooled enough that people were pulling their coats a little tighter as they walked along the sidewalks. The Mercer House was already busy. Through the tall front windows, I could see the warm dining room, filling with the quiet choreography of a Friday night crowd, servers moving carefully between tables, glasses catching the light, the low hum of conversations, layered over soft piano music. I paused just inside the doorway, while the host checked the reservation list. "Whitmore party," I said. The host's expression shifted instantly into the polished professionalism reserved for certain names. "Of course," he said. "Right this way." As we crossed the dining room, I spotted Ethan first. My brother stood near the center table, tall and confident, in a navy suit. His posture relaxed, in the easy way he had always carried himself in rooms like this. Beside him was Claire Whitmore, blonde, poised the quiet composure of someone who had grown up around public attention. Their parents sat nearby. I recognized Senator Robert Whitmore immediately. Even though the last time I had seen him, he had been standing in a dim hallway. His tie loosened his face, drawn with exhaustion. Tonight he looked different, formal, composed, the kind of presence people instinctively gave space to. My parents were already there as well. My mother noticed me first. For just a moment, something flickered across her face. Relief, maybe, or simple confirmation that I had followed the instructions. She stood halfway, greeting me with a careful smile before I even reached the table. "Claire," she said warmly, "this is Nora." Just Nora. No last name. No explanation. Claire turned politely. "It's nice to meet you." Before I could respond, the host slowed beside us. "And for you, ma'am," he said, gesturing toward the far side of the room. The table he indicated was smaller, set near the service corridor, where waiters passed quietly, with trays of drinks and plates. It was close enough to see the main table clearly, far enough that no one there would need to include me in the conversation. My mother's voice lowered gently. "It'll be quieter over there," she said. I nodded. There are moments when a person can still turn around and leave without anyone stopping them. This was one of those moments. Instead, I walked across the room and took the seat waiting for me at the edge of the dinner. From where I sat, I could see Ethan leaning slightly toward Senator Whitmore, already speaking with the relaxed confidence of someone who believed the evening was unfolding exactly the way he had planned. Across the room, the senator listened carefully, nodding once or twice as Ethan spoke. Then a server arrived with a tray of wine glasses, and the senator stood. He thanked the server, took 2 glasses from the tray, and began moving slowly between the tables, greeting guests with the quiet ease of someone accustomed to rooms full of people. Table by table, he worked his way across the dining room, and eventually his path began to angle toward the corner where I was sitting alone. From the corner table, the whole room looked arranged on purpose. That was the first thing that settled into me as I sat there with my hands folded in my lap and watched the dinner move around me. Not random, not rushed, not the kind of last-minute confusion families blame when they may need a softer version of the truth. Intentional. The main table sat in the warm center of the room beneath the chandelier light, where every important face could see every other important face. Mine sat near the service corridor, half in shadow, close enough for the staff to brush past with quiet efficiency, and far enough that no one at Ethan's table had to remember I was there, unless they wanted to. A waiter placed water in front of me and asked if I'd like wine. I said no. Across the room, Ethan was laughing at something Claire's mother had said. He had that easy, polished expression I had seen my whole life, the one that made people believe he belonged wherever he stood. My mother leaned toward Claire with the warm attentiveness she reserved for women she hoped would become useful to the family. My father kept his shoulders slightly back, his smile careful and practiced. Every one of them looked relieved. Not happy, relieved. Because I had come. Because I had sat where they wanted. Because I had not made them explain me. My phone rested in my purse, beside the Senate letter. For a moment, I left it there. Then I reached in and pulled it out, angling the screen toward myself beneath the table. Ethan's message was still there. "You can come if you want, but it would be better if you didn't mention you're my sister." Below it was the voicemail transcript from my mother, automatically generated when I hadn't answered her first call the day before. Most of it was softened by the app's usual mistakes, but the meaning came through clearly enough. Smaller table. Keep things simple. Just for one evening. And then farther down was the photo my friend Lila had sent that afternoon. Lila worked event logistics for a hotel group in Savannah. She hadn't meant to give me anything scandalous. She had simply forwarded a snapshot of the seating chart after I asked whether the arrangement looked final. My name was there exactly as it appeared on the reservation. Nora, no last name, no family marker, no place at the main table. The proof of it sat cold and flat in my hand. Not a misunderstanding, not a hasty adjustment. A plan. I looked up again. Senator Whitmore was still moving from table to table, speaking with the quiet steadiness of a man used to being listened to. Claire's father didn't dominate the room the way some powerful men do. He shaped it instead. People straightened a little when he paused near them. Their voices changed. Even from across the dining room, his presence seemed to carry its own gravity. Ethan wanted that gravity to bend toward him. That was the real shape of the night, and I understood something then that I should have understood much earlier. My family had never been asking me to keep the peace. They had been asking me to help them tell a lie about what kind of people they were. I slid the phone back into my purse right beside the letter. I could still leave. I could stand up, walk out, and let them wonder whether I had finally decided humiliation had a limit. Or I could stay where they had placed me and refuse, for once, to do any part of their work for them. Not a scene, not revenge, not even defiance in the dramatic sense. Just one clean line. If anyone asked me who I was, I would answer truthfully. That was all. But even as the decision settled inside me, I knew it was more than it sounded like. In my family, silence had always been a kind of service. Refusing it was its own form of separation. Across the room, Senator Whitmore handed off his empty glass to a passing server and turned. This time, he didn't stop at the next table. He kept walking toward mine, and when he reached the edge of the shadowed corner where my chair had been placed, he slowed, looked directly at my face, and went still. For a moment, Senator Robert Whitmore simply looked at me. Not the polite glance people give strangers in restaurants. Not the passing acknowledgement of someone noticing an empty chair or a misplaced coat. He looked at me the way people do when a memory is trying to settle into focus. Then he spoke. "Excuse me, ma'am," he said quietly. "Have we met before?" The dining room continued moving around us. Glasses, clinking a server, laughing softly at the bar, a chair scraping across polished wood somewhere behind me. But at my table, the air felt still. I stood. It was an instinct more than a decision. Hospice work had trained certain habits into me, and one of them was standing when someone older approached with that kind of seriousness. "Yes," I said calmly. "I believe we have." His eyes searched my face again carefully this time. "I'm trying to place it," he admitted. "It's been some time." Across the room, I could see movement, beginning at the main table. Ethan had noticed. My brother's head turned first, his expression tightening in the faint way people try to hide when something unexpected interrupts their plans. My mother followed his gaze. Claire leaned slightly forward in her chair, but Senator Whitmore hadn't looked back at them yet. "I'm Nora," I said. I paused, just long enough for the name to settle where it belonged. Nora Vale. The recognition arrived almost immediately. It showed, first in his eyes, then in the way his shoulders straightened, as if a quiet understanding had suddenly taken hold. "Of course," he said softly. "You were with Helen." He didn't say my wife. He said her name. That detail told me something important about the kind of man he was. "Yes," I said. "I was the hospice coordinator that night." For a brief moment, the room seemed to tilt in a direction Ethan had not planned. Senator Whitmore nodded slowly. "You stayed long after you needed to," he said. "My daughter and I spoke about that more than once." Now he glanced toward the main table. Claire had already risen halfway from her seat. "Dad," she called gently. But he lifted a hand, a small gesture, asking for a moment more. When he turned back to me, his voice had changed slightly. Not louder, but more deliberate. "I didn't realize you would be here tonight." That sentence carried more weight than anyone else in the room could hear yet. Because I understood what he meant. Not here in this building. Here at this table. Before I could answer, Ethan had crossed the room. He moved quickly, but not fast enough to look panicked. His smile appeared the moment he reached us. the same controlled public smile he used in photographs and campaign receptions. "Senator Whitmore," he said, smoothly, placing a light hand on the back of my chair, as if the gesture had always been natural. "I see you've met Nora." Met. The word hung there carefully. Claire had joined us now, her curiosity open but polite. Her eyes moved between her father, Ethan, and me. "You two know each other?" she asked. Before I could answer, Ethan stepped slightly closer. "Nora works in healthcare support," he explained quickly. "We've had some connections through community programs." Healthcare support. The phrase sounded almost identical to the way my parents used to describe my work. It was subtle, but it was also the first defensive move. Senator Whitmore didn't correct him immediately. Instead, he looked at Ethan for a long second, long enough that the smile on my brother's face stiffened, almost imperceptibly. Then the senator returned his attention to me. "I remember very clearly what you did for my wife," he said. There was nothing dramatic in the sentence, but the words landed in the quiet space between all of us. And for the first time that evening, Ethan removed his hand from the back of my chair. For several seconds after Senator Whitmore spoke, no one moved. It was the kind of silence that forms when a room realizes something important has just shifted, but no one is certain yet how far it will go. Claire was the first to break it. "You helped my mom," she asked, her voice soft but steady. She had stepped closer, now close enough that the lamplight caught the confusion in her expression. Up close, she looked less like a senator's daughter and more like someone suddenly trying to piece together a story she hadn't known she was missing. "Yes," I said simply. I kept my voice calm, the same tone I used with families during difficult conversations. "I was the hospice coordinator assigned that night." Claire glanced toward her father. He nodded once. "Nora stayed with us longer than her shift required," Senator Whitmore said. "Your mother was frightened. She helped settle the room." The words were gentle, but they carried the quiet authority of a man used to speaking facts that mattered. Across from us, Ethan's posture tightened. He laughed lightly, the sound just a shade too quick. "Right," he said. "That's what I was explaining earlier. Nora's done some volunteer work with community care programs." Volunteer work. The word slipped into the conversation like a soft correction. I felt the shift immediately. Ethan wasn't denying the moment. He was reshaping it. Senator Whitmore's eyes moved back to him. "Volunteer work," he repeated. Ethan nodded easily. "Yeah, she's always had a big heart. Helps out with a lot of service groups around Savannah." From the main table, my mother rose slowly and approached us. The smile on her face looked careful, almost fragile. "Robert," she said warmly, addressing the senator by his first name in the familiar tone people adopt when they hope proximity will soften a situation. "I'm so glad you two connected. Nora's always loved helping people. Loved helping, not trained, not professional. Helping." My father remained seated, but his gaze stayed fixed on the floor, as if studying the grain of the wood might solve something. Claire looked between all of us again. "Wait," she said quietly. "You were the hospice coordinator." The question hung in the air. I could see Ethan's attention snap toward me. For the first time that night, there was something sharp behind his smile. It wasn't anger. Not yet. It was warning. The kind siblings sometimes learn to recognize long before anyone else notices it. My answer mattered, not because it would embarrass him, but because it would dismantle the careful version of the story he had already started building for this room. I thought about the text message again. "You can come. Just don't say you're my sister." In that moment, I understood something else that message had really meant. He hadn't just been hiding me. He had been hiding the possibility that I might speak. "Yes," I said. Claire's eyes widened slightly. "Were you there when my mother passed?" she asked. "Yes." Her father watched quietly, his expression unreadable. Ethan stepped closer again, his hand briefly brushing the back of my chair, the way someone might guide a conversation away from an uncomfortable edge. "Well," he said smoothly, "it was a long time ago. Hospice has a lot of different volunteers rotating through those programs." The word volunteers landed again, deliberate this time. And for the first time since the evening began, I realized the risk had shifted. This wasn't just about whether the truth would be heard. It was about whether Ethan could convince the room that my version of it was smaller than his. Claire looked at her father. "Dad," she said quietly. Senator Whitmore didn't answer immediately. He studied Ethan for a long moment. Then he turned back toward me. But before he spoke, I saw something change across the room. At the main table, two of the guests Ethan had been trying so hard to impress had stopped eating. They were watching us now, and the room that had once been carefully arranged to keep me invisible was beginning to listen. Senator Whitmore did not raise his voice. That was what changed the room. A louder man might have made the moment feel theatrical, something people could later dismiss as an unfortunate scene at dinner. But Robert Whitmore simply stood where he was, one hand resting lightly on the back of the empty chair beside my table, and looked at Ethan with the kind of patience that leaves no easy exit. "You said she did volunteer work," he said. Ethan gave a small shrug, as if the wording hardly mattered. "That's basically what I meant." No one believed him. I could feel it before I saw it. The room had gone too still. Even the servers had begun moving more carefully, as if instinct had told them to make less sound. Claire was still standing near her father. She looked at me first, then back at Ethan. "You told me she helped out sometimes," she said. "You never said she was the coordinator who was there with my mother." Her voice wasn't angry yet. It was worse than anger. It was the beginning of recalculation. Ethan turned toward her, with the same expression he used whenever he wanted to restore order quickly. "Claire, it just never seemed important to get into all the details." Important, that word landed badly. Because all evening had been built around importance. Important family, important guests, important impressions, important names. My mother stepped in before the silence could harden any further. "It really was just a matter of seating," she said, her tone smooth and brittle at the same time. "We were trying to keep things balanced. There were donors, campaign people, colleagues, so she was placed back here on purpose," Senator Whitmore said. He didn't phrase it as a question. My mother blinked once, caught between retreat and explanation. "It wasn't meant as an insult," she said softly. That was the first honest thing anyone in my family had said all night. Not because it cleared them, because it admitted intent. Claire heard it too. I saw it in the way her shoulders shifted. Something inside her had moved from confusion to understanding. Ethan must have felt it as well, because he changed tactics. He laughed once, quietly, and spread his hands in a gesture meant to make the whole thing seem smaller than it was. "Honestly, this is being blown out of proportion," he said. "Nora doesn't care about stuff like this." That was the sentence that did it. Not the message, not the chair, not even the volunteer lie. That sentence, "Nora doesn't care," as though he had the authority to narrate what I felt, as though my silence had always been proof of consent instead of exhaustion. Senator Whitmore looked at me, then not to rescue me, but to make space. It was the first truly generous thing anyone in that room had done for me all evening. And because of that, I understood what my next step had to be. I didn't need to argue with Ethan. I didn't need to explain my life. I only needed to stop letting him define it. "I care," I said. The words were quiet, but they carried farther than I expected. "I kept my eyes on my brother. I cared when you told me not to say I was family. I cared when Mom said I should sit near the service corridor to keep things comfortable. And I care now, because none of this happened by accident." No one interrupted me. I reached into my purse and took out my phone, then unlocked the screen with steady hands. I wasn't shaking anymore. The panic of the last few minutes had narrowed into something cleaner. Control. I held the phone out toward Senator Whitmore first. Not Ethan, not Claire, not my mother. "This is the message he sent me," I said. The senator took the phone without ceremony and read in silence. I watched his face change, only slightly, but enough. Then Claire stepped closer. "May I?" she asked. Her father handed her the phone. The room remained quiet as she read. I could almost feel the entire evening reorganizing itself around a truth that no one at the main table could smooth over now. And when Claire finally looked up at Ethan, the engagement ring on her left hand caught the light as she tightened her fingers once around the phone. Claire handed the phone back to her father with a face that had gone almost unnaturally still. Not blank, not confused, still. It was the kind of stillness people reach only after a private calculation has finished, and something inside them has settled into certainty. Ethan saw it too, Claire, he said quietly, taking one step toward her. You know this isn't what it looks like. It was the first truly desperate thing he had said all evening. Until then, he had been trying to manage the room, manage the language, manage me. But that sentence wasn't strategy. It was reflex. Claire didn't answer him right away. She looked down at the phone in her father's hand, then at me, then back at Ethan. When she spoke, her voice was level enough to make everyone at the nearest tables stop pretending not to listen. It looks like you asked your own sister to sit near a service corridor and keep quiet so my family wouldn't know who she was. There was no softness left in the wording. My mother took a half step forward. Claire, sweetheart, it truly wasn't meant the way this is sounding, she said. Everyone's tired. It's been a long week. Ethan was just trying to make sure the evening went smoothly. Smoothly. That word almost made me laugh, because smooth was what families like mine called dishonesty, when they hoped civility would keep it from being named. Senator Whitmore turned slightly toward Ethan. You told my daughter that Nora did occasional volunteer work, he said. You did not tell her she was the hospice coordinator who cared for her mother. You did not tell her Nora was your sister. And you placed her at the edge of this room so no one would ask questions. His tone remained measured. That made every word land harder. Ethan opened his mouth, then closed it again. For one suspended second, I thought he might tell the truth. Not all of it, maybe, but enough to stop the damage from spreading further. Instead, he chose the same instinct that had shaped his whole life. Minimize. She's blowing this up, he said, nodding toward me. Nora has always been sensitive about where she fits in the family. The sentence hit the room like something dropped and broken. Not because it was loud, because it was familiar. My father flinched slightly, the first visible sign that he understood exactly how bad this had become. My mother's face tightened with the panic of someone realizing the script had slipped beyond recovery. Claire stared at Ethan as if she had never seen him clearly until that moment. Then she reached up with one hand and touched the engagement ring on her finger. No one breathed. She didn't yank it off. She didn't cry. She simply twisted it once slowly, like someone testing whether a thing still belonged to her. It isn't the message, she said at last. It's that you knew exactly what you were doing, and you did it anyway. Ethan stepped closer. Claire, please. But Senator Whitmore moved before she could answer. Not aggressively, not theatrically. He simply shifted his position enough to stand between his daughter and the version of the evening Ethan was still trying to salvage. That will be enough, he said. And then, with the calm finality of a man who had spent years closing doors for a living, he added, this dinner is over for us. The room changed instantly. Not with noise, with withdrawal. Claire slid the ring from her finger and placed it on the table nearest her father's hand. The soft sound it made against the white linen was somehow louder than Ethan's voice had been all night. My mother let out a sharp breath, almost a gasp. Robert, surely, this doesn't need to become... But he stopped her with a look alone. There will be no wedding, he said. And there will be no further discussion tonight about introductions, donations, or future involvement. That last part hit Ethan hardest. I saw it in his face, because the loss was no longer social embarrassment. It was structural now. The life he had been constructing through this engagement, the donors, the invitations, the access, the status, had just begun collapsing in public. Claire didn't look at him again. She only turned to me, her expression pale and strained. I'm sorry, she said quietly. Then she left with her father. For a long moment after they were gone, no one at the main table spoke. The servers returned in cautious silence. Guests lowered their eyes, lifted their glasses, adjusted napkins, small movements people make when they want to create distance between themselves and someone whose collapse they have just witnessed. Ethan remained standing exactly where he was, and for the first time in my life, he looked like a man no room had decided to carry. The dinner ended slowly, not with a dramatic exit or raised voices, but with the kind of quiet unraveling that happens when a room realizes something irreversible has just occurred. People began leaving in small, careful clusters. Chairs slid back softly against the floor. Napkins were folded. Conversations restarted in low tones that stayed safely away from the center table where my family still sat. Ethan hadn't moved. He was still standing near the chair Claire had left behind, staring at the white tablecloth where the engagement ring had rested moments earlier. My mother spoke first. "Ethan," she said quietly, "sit down." But he didn't. For the first time that evening, he looked unsure of where he belonged. My father cleared his throat, the sound heavy with the kind of resignation that comes when a man realizes the structure he trusted to hold his family together has quietly collapsed. "You should go home," he said to Ethan. Not angry, just final. Ethan finally sat, but only for a moment. Then he stood, again ran a hand through his hair, and looked toward me. I had expected anger, blame. Instead, what I saw was something much simpler and much harder for him to carry. Recognition, not of what he had done to me tonight, but of how many years he had assumed the room would always lean in his direction. "You didn't have to do that," he said. I met his eyes. "I didn't," I answered. "You did." That was the last real conversation we had that evening. He left a few minutes later without saying goodbye to anyone. My mother tried to follow him, but my father stopped her with a hand on her arm. "Let him go," he said. Outside the restaurant, the October air felt colder than it had earlier in the evening. The city lights along the street flickered softly against the dark windows of parked cars. For the first time all night, I was alone. Not abandoned, just alone. I stood there for a moment, letting the quiet settle around me. My phone buzzed once in my purse. When I looked at the screen, it was a message from Claire. I didn't know. I truly didn't. "I'm sorry for what happened to you tonight." I stared at the message for a long moment before typing a reply. "You weren't the one who made the choice." A few seconds later, 3 dots appeared, then disappeared. She didn't write again. That felt right. Some things don't need immediate repair. They just need distance and time. I slipped the phone back into my purse and started walking toward the parking garage, a block away. The city had begun settling into the slower rhythm of late evening taxis, idling restaurant doors, opening and closing, the distant hum of traffic. For years, I had believed silence meant weakness. Tonight, I finally understood something different. Silence can also be patience. And patience, when this truth is allowed to arrive in its own time, has a way of restoring things that anger never could. By the time I reached my car, the weight that had followed me into the restaurant earlier that evening had finally lifted. Not completely, but enough. Enough to breathe. Enough to leave. Enough to begin the quieter work of living a life no one else would ever get to narrate for me again. If you've ever experienced a moment when truth changed how a family saw itself, feel free to share your story in the comments. Sometimes, hearing another person's path through justice and healing reminds us we're not alone. And if this story resonated with you, consider following along for the next one.